Hello and welcome to The Discussion. My name is Elizabeth Pfeiffer and I'm a writer for the Boardwalk Times. This is the show where I'm going to talk to interesting people doing awesome things in the Disney community. Our guest today is Andrew Kiste. He's the author of A Historical Tour of Walt Disney World and most recently, this book right here, Walt Disney in the 1964-1965 World's Fair Great Moments. Andrew and I had an awesome chat about what it's like publishing history books. He is a teacher by day, a father by night, and all the time an awesome Disney historian. So I hope you enjoy our conversation and stick to the end of the video so you can know where to follow Andrew and where to get more awesome content like this. Hey Andrew, thank you so much for coming and chatting on The Discussion. How did this come about? Like, history, was that always a thing? And then was Disney always a thing for you?
Yeah, so I've always had a passion for history. Growing up, my family and I, we would always go on vacation to different history places. So, Colonial Williamsburg, places like that, Mackinac Island, Philadelphia. And so, history was always something that was really interesting. I always knew I wanted to go into a history profession somehow. So I kind of went the route of teaching. And then we also ended up going to Disney World about every other year when I was growing up. So that was something that I kind of grew up with too. And so as I got older, I was kind of able to combine those two passions together about writing about Disney. There were a couple of years where I actually went through and made my own burn bombs, vacation guides of Disney World, where I kind of wrote my own reviews of the rides. And then it was probably in 2007, I was listening to a podcast, and there was a call out. They're going to be starting a new Disney-based magazine, and they wanted people to write articles for their first issue. So I ended up writing an article about the 2007 marathon weekend that I participated in, and that just kind of got me starting to write about Disney on a professional level. And then I ended up writing an article about Pirates of the Caribbean and whether or not it was historically accurate, and the magazine decided that it was too academic to post in their magazine, so they put it online on their blog. And then I was approached by Theme Park Press, who read my blog and offered me a book deal to do something similar.
That's fantastic. So just finding a book deal kind of came to you. I know that authors all over seek those out, so it just was kind of handed to you. How did that feel? Is that something that you were interested in, or was it totally out of the blue?
So, I've been one of those kids that always wrote growing up. I was constantly writing stories. So, writing a book was kind of a dream of mine. But getting into the book world, the literary world, is very difficult. Oftentimes, in order to submit something to a publisher, you have to get yourself an agent, and oftentimes agents don't really take open inquiries. And so the fact that it just kind of fell in my lap like that was kind of a dream come true, because it wasn't something that I was necessarily actively seeking. In fact, I ended up getting an email just out of the blue one day from the publisher, and I didn't think it was legitimate. I thought it was maybe spam mail. I didn't really understand what or who it was until I did more investigation and realized I'd actually read books that were written or published by that publisher in the past. And so I ended up working with Theme Park Press, and the rest is history.
That's awesome. So your first book, A Historical Tour of Walt Disney World, what was that like? So you did that article about Pirates of the Caribbean. I read it. It's fantastic. So it's that, but totally on a different level. What kind of research went into that?
It was pretty unconventional. I spent a lot of time on YouTube watching the most recent ride-through videos that people had taken on their trips to Walt Disney World. I did a lot of work with Google Maps and Google Image Search, just so I could kind of place myself virtually at the parks and in the attractions. And then in terms of the historical research, I did a lot of work with historical books. I used historical research databases, and used a lot of websites, as well as some historical background knowledge that I already had to kind of do the historical analysis of the attractions.
So when you went on to do your other volumes, was that the same process?
So after, the first volume was published, I didn't plan on writing it as an actual series, but it was well received by people within the Disney community. And so I decided to continue to write more. The first book was really just the attractions that I grew up loving. Pirates of the Caribbean, the Jungle Cruise, Main Street USA. And so, I considered what other attractions could I focus on. So I looked into things like, the Country Bear Jamboree, and I believe Storybook Circus is that part of that volume, and Spaceship Earth. And so, I was able to kind of write about other lands and other attractions that I was really interested in. But I was able to convince my wife that, I need to do first-person research. And so I kind of talked her into taking our family down to Walt Disney World for research purposes, but it was more of an excuse to just go down and visit. So.
Oh man, dang it. Dad has to go do research. I guess we'll go to Disney World. That's funny. So those books did awesome. They were in Barnes & Noble. That's where I got my copy, which is phenomenal. Did you think that was it, or did you always have plans for your next books?
So, I ended up writing a third volume of a historical tour of Walt Disney World, but, as I wrote more books within that series, it wasn't as successful moving forward. I think it was really kind of a niche market. People thought that they were about the history of the Disney attractions rather than the history behind the Disney attractions. And so as I published subsequent books, the interest kind of waned. And so, I decided to take a break from writing for a while and just kind of let things settle. I was busy with school. And so I was driving down the highway one day with my wife, and we were talking about New York World's Fair. I don't remember specifically why, but she was really interested. And she said, well, has anybody ever written any books about that? And I kind of sat back and thought, because, it's, the New York World's Fair and the involvement that Disney had in it is almost legendary. Like, everybody kind of sees that as, a turning point or a pinnacle in Walt Disney's history. And so I contemplated, and I said, I don't think anybody's ever written a book about it. And so I set out to write a single book about Disney's involvement in the 1964 World's Fair. And what I quickly realized was that it was going to be a multi-volume series in order to effectively tell that entire story.
It seems like you're kind of on a roll now of getting things published. Like, you've got this one, there are more volumes in this series to go. Did you have to seek out a publisher for this, or did they kind of find you, or how did that work?
So the publisher for the New York World's Fair book series is the same publisher as the Historical Tour of Walt Disney World. So I was able to kind of reach out to the publisher and say, hey, I've got this other idea. What do you think about this? And, he was really intrigued, just as a Disney fan himself. What was really fun for me in terms of doing the research for this book was I was able to go to the Illinois State Archives in Springfield, Illinois, and dig through the official state archives to get all of their records of Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln. So that was really interesting, getting to work with the archivists and actually touch and hold documents that were written from Walt Disney to, the governor of Illinois. And I was even able to reach out to some people that worked at the Illinois Pavilion at the World's Fair and kind of interview them for my book.
So gathering all this research, how do you organize all of that stuff that you find? What's that process kind of like?
So I have multiple 4-inch binders that are actually on my bookshelf here in my office that are just full of photocopies of these primary sources. And I actually organize them in chronological order. So, the documents that I have about Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln go as far back as the late 1950s, as Walt and his Imagineers started planning for the Hall of Presidents, which was just a wax museum version of what we know at Walt Disney World today, all the way through 1966, after Great Moments had opened at Disneyland and the World's Fair had shut down. So everything's in chronological order. There's 2 large notebooks that I have that I would take time going through the documents and highlighting everything, and then kind of taking that and crafting it into a narrative was kind of the process.
So you mentioned earlier that you're a teacher and you're a dad. How do you balance all of that and writing books at the same time?
Yeah, summers and vacations are great. My wife is awesome in that she gives me time to go up to my office and just get work done. Tonight she's got the boys out, and so I spent some time here kind of working on a proposal for a new book, while at the same time, getting a chance to sit and talk to you. Summer vacations, I get a lot of work done where I get about an hour a day, or I take about an hour a day to sit down and write. I go on research trips. I'm hopefully planning on taking a trip to Chicago, Marceline, and Kansas City sometime in the near future to do some research. So really it's just kind of, taking time, bringing my family along into stuff. I've got 8-year-old twin boys, and they like sitting and doing research in Daddy's office while I'm doing research. So we kind of make it a family event to kind of do that together.
So you're working on some new books. How much can you tell us about those new books?
So I got approached by a publisher in Great Britain, and they wanted me to write a biographical series about Walt Disney. So I'm in the process of doing that. I'm not going to spoil things yet, but it's going to be a different angle on the life of Walt Disney than what we've seen before, and it will actually be a multi-book series. So I'm in the process of doing some research on that, and that should be out sometime in the next couple of years. And then I'm also working on the second volume of the World's Fair series, which will focus on Ford's Magic Skyway. So this past summer, I went up to the Ford Archives in Dearborn, Michigan, and then spent 2 days going through all of their stuff. And I've got 4 notebooks full of documents for that.
Books go through edits and there's so much information that you're getting. Is there anything that like sticks out to you that's like, oh, this is so interesting, but it just can't be in the book? Like, are there any facts, or did you make sure that everything was in there?
Kind of the opposite. There's a lot that goes into, specifically, with the World's Fair, the Great Moments of Mr. Lincoln. There was so much that went into the development of that attraction. The documents that I have are actually minutes from the Illinois Commission, which is the organization that actually planned and developed the Illinois Pavilion for the World's Fair. A lot of people think, okay, Disney developed the Illinois Pavilion, but really it was the state of Illinois that developed that pavilion. Mm-hmm. Disney just created the main attraction for that show. So they had other exhibits there, they had artwork and music, they had special programs that were put on, and the Great Moments of Mr. Lincoln show was just a small part of that pavilion. But a lot that were in those documents were things like ticket prices and arguments between the different members of the Illinois Commission and budgets and all that kind of stuff. And so a lot of that had to be cut out, just because while it's part of the story, it's not necessarily an interesting part of the story, at least for people who are not historians. And so some of that stuff had to be cut out. There's other stuff too. I would have loved to have interviewed more people that worked at the New York World's Fair, but I wasn't able to necessarily get a hold of as many people as I could, just because a lot of these people are in their 70s and 80s now. And so it's difficult to get a hold of people that are not necessarily savvy with technology.
Yeah, that makes sense. Who was the most interesting person that you got to interview?
So I had two different people. I had a guy named Kent Flora and a lady named Miss Medley, and they were just wonderful to work with. I had multiple conversations with them on the phone. They were hilarious. They would send me emails. They sent me pictures or on their phone or on their email of them at the World's Fair. So it was just great getting to talk to them, really special. And I sent them both copies of the book after I had gotten done writing it and published it. And, they read it and provided great feedback as though they were back at the fair again. So that was really exciting. And I've already been able to get in touch with some people that worked at the Ford Pavilion, so that'll be really good to kind of work with them as well. So with the New York World's Fair book, I understand history is not necessarily people's favorite subject to study. A lot of people are more into either the maths or the sciences or the technology. But being a history teacher, I understand, history can be boring for people. And so what I tried to do when I wrote that World's Fair book was to actually craft it more into a story. So while the historical tour of Walt Disney World books are more, historical analysis and interpretation, the New York World's Fair book really tells a narrative. It tells a story, and it follows the journey of the different people who developed the attraction, the people who were in Illinois, who helped create the pavilion itself, as well as the backstory of the New York World's Fair. So, if you're interested in the New York World's Fair or history or Disney, it's got a little something for everyone in there.
Would you like to plug any social media or your website or anything like that?
Yeah, so you can visit my website at www.kistethehistorian.com. Kiste is spelled K-I-S-T-E. On there, you can keep up with my blog. You can contact me through my Contact Me page. You can see book reviews, podcasts, YouTube videos that have been posted about my books, and you can also see my interactive bibliography. I went through and made digital PDFs of every single source that I used for the World's Fair book, and I've uploaded those to my website, so you can actually see a lot of these documents that I reference, as well as a lot of the minutes from the Illinois State Commission. You can also find me on Twitter at HistTourWDW, and I'm also on Facebook as a historical tour of Walt Disney World.
Thank you guys so much for watching, and thank you again, Andrew, for coming on the show. That was a fantastic discussion. Be sure to check out Andrew's Facebook page, Twitter page, website, and order his books. If you want to read all about the latest Disney news, head over to the Boardwalk Times at boardwalktimes.net for more awesome Disney content. We've got news, we've got blogs, and more recently, YouTube stuff. If you like the discussion, please give us a big like, tweet us at Boardwalk Times. I'd love to hear what you think about the show. Yeah, thank you guys so much. Have a magical day, and we'll see you in the next episode.